And God's like, that's what you said you wanted. You broke the covenant. You left yourself open. You won't find anywhere where Satan's walking around going, hey, God, what about Joshua? Let me have it at it with him for a while. Let me be on Moses for a while. No, it wasn't that. It was a whole different structure. So we can't take Job and somehow pull it into today and try to make it today's experience and that it's scriptural. My own personal conviction is that many of us that do that actually open the door for the enemy to raise havoc in our life, and it's a door that we open that was never intended to be opened. It's been closed, and what's been closed, don't open it. Satan doesn't have that level of access into my life or your life. He doesn't have that place of authority. The truth is, you have more dominion than he has. You have more authority than he has. And the only game in town is him convincing me that I don't have what I really have. And me going, I guess so. Well, you know how it is. I'm just picking up my cross. Yes, the hard road. Somebody break out a Southern gospel hymn. I'm going to... I'm just suffering for Jesus. He suffered for me. And I know in a land that's a-coming, I'll have a different life. But in this life, there's toil and there's trouble. And there's suffering of many. That's enough of that. I'm just trying out for her play. That's all. I'm just trying out for her play. Keep that in mind. I'll be the old guy that has all the trouble. We don't give Satan that level of access because he doesn't have it. We don't give him that level of dominion because he doesn't have it. We're in a new covenant. This new covenant shifted everything. The cross shifted everything. Jesus said, all authority has been given to me. And then he turns and says, now this authority that's been given to me, I give it to you. And then he says, take this authority that I've given to you, now go to the ends of the earth and change the earth. Don't make Job the fifth gospel. Don't take troubles that you're experiencing, trials that you're experiencing, and somehow pull Job into that and use Job as a scriptural justification for why you're going through what you're going through. Don't do it. It's a lie. It's misappropriating Scripture. It's taking something that wasn't even Old Covenant. It was pre-Old Covenant. And pulling it into the New Covenant and trying to make it a way of life. It's not. You just make yourself a lot of trouble. Okay. Now, let me try to wrap this up. Those are kind of the frameworks. Those are some of the questions we're going to be looking at in the weeks ahead. I'm going to be taking kind of each of those points and going further. But today I want to mess with you. I saved the best for last. I want to briefly talk to you about my own journey that's not done and where I'm at the moment. And I believe if you move in this direction, if you're not there already, the book of Job, you'll see it entirely differently. There's two different general theologies that in the Protestant church we're in one camp or the other. And the first camp has been the predominant camp since the Reformation. So and those two theologies are classical theology and open theism. In classical or Reformed theology, its roots are in the Reformation. So coming through the Reformation, John Calvin and Martin Luther were the two leading theologians of the Reformation. And as the two leading theologians, what they were writing began to permeate Europe, and it began to shift how Europe was seeing things. And of course we know that the writings of Luther ended up being basically the doctrinal statements and the statement of faith of the Lutheran Church. And so that was that. Calvin was for the Reformed Church, the Presbyterian Church. So the writings of Calvin would be what's now called, or would be labeled now, Reformed theology. And they represent a line of thinking that filled the church and filled the church to today. It's not unusual at all. You know, you'll see churches, we're a Reformed church. Well, what do they say when they're a Reformed church? They say we follow the theology of Calvin and the Reformed theology. So whatever we preach, whatever we teach, is going to be in the framework of Reformed theology. And most other denominations will hold some level of Reformed theology. Now, we also, and we'll talk about this on another day, because my goal is not to teach all this, but I got to get this out so it's a framework, because I'm going to be talking from this point of view every time I talk about the book of Job. And if you don't catch me in this, I don't think you'll be clear. There are other theologies, Arminian, Wesley and what he brought forth. So there's other theologies that were added after the Reformation that changed classical theology. So there's other camps that have other ways of thinking as well. But the predominant impact of all these has really been Calvin and what Calvin wrote. And it's laid a foundation that a lot of others have built on. So, you all with me? You okay? You didn't, you know. I don't want to. I know this is like. Why is he talking about this? Well, because informed minds want to know, inquisitive minds want to know, right? Yeah. Okay. So here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the 5 pillars of Reformed theology. The first pillar, total depravity. Human beings are completely corrupted by sin and cannot by themselves do any righteous acts. So under Reformed theology, everybody is totally corrupt, totally abased, and outside of the work coming into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ, no person can do anything of any righteous or redeeming act. The second, unconditional election. God, through his own personal choice, elects some to be saved, and those who are not elected are lost forever. So salvation comes to those that find it, but you didn't really find it. God found you. He gave it to you. Sorry about the guy standing next to you. He wasn't in the lottery, so he's lost forever. You should be happy. You get to go to heaven. Limited atonement is the third one. Jesus did not die for all people, but just for those God has elected to be saved. So salvation is not universal. It's not something that covers everything. Those that, is there anybody here not saved? Okay. So, now that I can talk to the elect. We're the chosen few. And Jesus died for us. But he didn't die for the guys that are up at the bar drinking. Limited atonement. Irresistible grace. Those whom God elects to be saved can do nothing to prevent this from happening. Okay, elect. Wasn't that a wonderful moment? You couldn't have stopped it if you'd wanted to. These are the pillars of Reformed theology. And perseverance of the saints. Once someone is saved, he or she is always saved. So you didn't pick to be saved, you were elected to be saved. Once you were saved, the atoning work of the cross was only for you who are saved, and you can't do anything to get unsaved. And they get upset at us grace preachers. Okay. Now there's also 5 other pillars, if you want, of Reformed theology. The first one is God is omnipotent. So God is all-powerful and has sovereignty over all things. The next one is God is omnipresent. God is present everywhere and at all times. He's omniscient. God knows everything, past, present, and future. Impassibility. Nothing ever happens to God. He takes the initiative in all things. Immutability. God never changes, including changes his mind. So those all represent the pillars of thought in Reformed theology. So if you're in another church and a preacher is out of that background, then the way the sermon is framed is going to generally be framed in this theological viewpoint. Now, in America, we have a whole bunch of independent churches, i.e., us. And a lot of us, we don't really know what we believe, and we don't know where we've come from, and we don't know where we're going. So we'll talk about anything. And it's just this hodgepodge of stuff. But people that have been properly schooled would hold this and would preach it from that standpoint. Honestly, I'd rather be talking to someone that's been schooled so that they actually know what they're talking about than have to argue with somebody that has no idea what they're talking about. Because they're all over the place. You can't even get to a point where you can really frame a disagreement because they don't even know what they believe. So it's like, would you just stand still long enough? I'm trying to disagree with you. Okay. The second theology that is it's not new, but it's emerging. And this happens to be where I've come to after quite some journey. I'm not saying you have to believe it this way. I'm just saying that's where I'm coming from. But I want to talk about that a little bit because I believe that open theism, if we understand it, the book of Job takes on a whole different perspective than it does if I read it through a Reformed theology perspective. If I read it through Reformed theology, the book of Job will line up quite nicely with everything I believe. If I read it through open theism, the book of Job will quite nicely line up with everything I believe. But we'll arrive at two different places. Open theism. Let me say this. Every time there's a reformation in society that God is breathing in a reformation, the theology of the reformers will always bring about a change, and that change will be societal in its impact. So, first Reformation, the theology that Calvin and the theology that Luther brought out and others, what did it do? It began to free man to begin to see that he was not indebted to the church, and the way he was indebted to the church directly impacted how he had a relationship with God. So I can't come directly to God. I have to come through the people in the church who are designated as the ones that are able to take me to God. And the reformers came along and said, no, that's not how God is. God is over here looking for a personal relationship. By grace we've been saved. This isn't about having an allegiance to the church, and the allegiance to the church gives me a way to have a relationship with God, or at least be known by God. No, that's each person on his own. Salvation is my own personal responsibility. Salvation is something I have to do. So the theology that came up out of the Reformation, I'm not kicking against it. It was vital in the day, and it changed the whole society because it broke men free from the constraints of the church that had held them in a governmental fashion that was illegitimate, and it freed them to begin to have a relationship with God. For by grace have I been saved, and this isn't of me. It's something that he's done. I now have access into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So it freed society, it freed the human race to go, that's not how God operates. This is how God operates. And so we are still living in the effect of that revelation. And it's a good effect. So please don't hear I'm not being critical at all, but I do have a difference of opinion. In the Reformation that we're in right now, and we are in a global Reformation, I don't care who I talk to, it's happening. The church is shifting. Governmental structures are shifting. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. People don't know how's all this going to